joining us is Tony Wan, who is the head of investor content at Reach Capital. He's going to start our presentation today with education's new virtual reality. Thank you very much for joining us today, Tony.
Thank you, Lee, and it is a pleasure to be here. I hope that you can all hear me. Tell me if not otherwise. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be joining from. It is a pleasure to be here today. My name is Tony Wan, and I'm the head of investor content at Reach Capital. We are a venture capital firm that invests in the education sector from early childhood through K-12, higher education, adult learning, and workforce development. And it's a pleasure to share some of our high-level thoughts on some of the K-12 and higher education trends that we are seeing. So let me pull up my slides. Give me 1 second. Can you all see this?
Yes, we can.
That's great. Thank you, Lee. All right. So at Reach Capital, we are investors, but before we were investors, many of us were former classroom teachers and former entrepreneurs building education businesses. I was a former journalist at EdSurge reporting on the education technology space. And so we very much approach our work from a lens on the impact that our work has on students and teachers. Generally, when we think about education, it has a reputation for moving pretty slowly, but, due to the pandemic, never have some of these changes that we've seen in the past recent years felt so fast. The reality is that the pandemic has really accelerated fundamental shifts in how we live, how we learn, how we work. And as investors, the pace of change is thrilling, but as parents and former educators, it is also a wake-up call to some of the new challenges and outstanding inequities that persist for many teachers and learners. And so earlier this summer, we put out this report to document these challenges, and some of the lessons that we saw and that we learned are ones that we think will fundamentally change the future of teaching and learning. And I'm honored to be invited here to share some of the highlights today. So last year, as schools closed, many teachers and students went online to continue some semblance of instruction. This resulted in a dramatic increase in the use of the number of educational tools and websites in order to keep some instruction going. Some of the most popular resources were things like Google Drive and Wikipedia, along with some edtech products like Khan Academy and Kahoot that really have a global footprint across schools and at homes. Some of the biggest surges that we saw were in tools like Google Classroom and Zoom that made it possible to keep some semblance of remote instruction going. Google Classroom, as one example, grew nearly fourfold in terms of the usage. Zoom education users made up 50% of all overall subscribers in less than 3 months during the early months of the pandemic. So we saw how technology was able to fill a critical, some of these critical gaps, but more so in more of an emergency and a response setting. We also saw tools like ClassDojo that served as an important communication platform that kept teachers, students, and families in touch. And others like Nearpod were proved to be an essential way for teachers to be able to deliver engaging and interactive content to students. And similarly, they both saw a pretty dramatic spike in the amount of usage that they saw. There were some learning activities that happen in day-to-day classroom that translate easily online. There were reading content on platforms like Newsela, and also digital study apps and flashcards like Quizlet that also saw a pretty tremendous uptick in new signups and new active users. Now, As investors, I think all of these numbers would generally make most investors happy. But one of the things that we know is that the accelerating use of technologies did not always make students and teachers' lives easier. Overnight, many teachers had to learn how to teach and learn how to use online tools effectively, which, of course, I think many were not properly prepared or trained for. And as a result, there were some challenges. One of the biggest challenges that teachers reported was keeping students engaged and motivated. The lack of hands-on learning opportunities made many lessons and projects difficult to carry out. And it was also difficult for teachers to really assess, the students' emotional cues that you would normally pick up in a face-to-face setting. It was really hard to do that online. One of the biggest issues that concerned us was the increase in mental health problems, such as loneliness, depression, and suicidal, thoughts. And survey after surveys of parents and students found that the isolation that was caused by the pandemic really exacerbated mental health problems, which of course then affected many students' ability to focus on learning and academics. It is hard to focus on learning content when a lot of your other basic life needs and social needs are not being met. And for teachers, the overnight shift to remote learning, really, caused a lot of burnout and stress. Prior to the pandemic, teaching was already a pretty stressful profession. And for many teachers, some of these new responsibilities really pushed them over the edge. One survey found that teachers had about twice the rate of extreme stress as the average adult and 3 times the reported rate of depression. Now, despite these problems, we also want to acknowledge that technology can play a role and be effective at enabling human connections and social experiences in ways that may not have been tried before in many schools before the pandemic. One of the most popular ed tech services used around the world that I mentioned earlier is Kahoot, which lets students and teachers create learning games and challenges that they can play in social environments. Another company called OutSchool offers an online marketplace that connects teachers with kids for live small group online classes that are based around academics and hobbies. And so one of the important shifts that we saw is that a lot of education technologies in the previous days were really focused around passive learning and content consumption, but we also saw instances of tools that can enable new kinds of connections and community-based learning, as long as they are designed thoughtfully and with a pedagogically informed approach. We also saw that many schools are working with education technology companies to make on-demand 24/7 access to online tutoring available for all students. And we think this is a game changer because in the past, one-on-one tutoring was largely limited to families who can afford it. But by making the service available through schools and districts, it can make tutoring more equitable and make a difference in helping students address learning losses from the pandemic. Now, one of the biggest and perhaps the most appropriate concerns around technology is how much time kids are spending in front of screens. During the pandemic, to no surprise, the average screen time for kids doubled from 3 to 6 hours, and the percentage of kids spending more than 8 hours also greatly increased. Now, one of the assumptions is that they are just passively consuming content online, and that may be true for many kids. But one of the things that surprised us was that this wasn't the case, and in fact, kids also found ways to do productive things as well. One of the phenomenons that really caught me by surprise was the emergence of this platform called the Study Web, which is a collection of popular platforms like Discord, TikTok, and YouTube, where kids are actually coming online to study together. So they're recreating study groups in the library, but doing it online, in front of a computer. And we thought it was pretty interesting. Many kids are also building and creating things online as well, and in some cases, they're even making money from selling things that they're building and selling. One of the most popular destinations is Roblox, which offers an online game creation platform where many kids can create and share games and also participate in a virtual economy. And there's also another platform called Replit, which is a browser-based coding environment that allows kids to collaborate and coding projects. So, these are instances that offer a lot of promise and potential in the ways in how kids are gravitating naturally towards online platforms to do, build, and sometimes sell things in ways that are productive. Now, given the acceleration of these technology trends and as COVID continues to impact how schools operate, we expect that students and families want and will have more options for how and where they learn. Over the pandemic, we saw that many families want remote learning to be available as an option, and that some say they may stick with it indefinitely. Some of the common reasons why parents say, have that preference is that they say that, the kids and children feel safer. We do have to acknowledge that unfortunately schools are not always safe or welcoming environments for every student, that bullying, for example, is a problem. And that there continues to be some health considerations. I think that we all hope that that the COVID situation will pass, but we think that in the near future, the continued evolution of some of the strains, as well as immunocompromised families and populations, will demand safer learning environments. Now, one of the barriers to making remote learning work has been a lack of computers, devices, and broadband available in order for students and teachers to access the online tools and services in the first place. Before the pandemic, in a developed country like the U.S., as many as about 30% of U.S. K-12 students lacked the means to access digital learning at home during the early days. But thanks to some major technology investments from both the public and private sector, we saw a concerted effort to procure devices and broadband. In the US alone, K-12 computer shipments nearly doubled year over year. And by the end of the year, nearly every teacher in surveys said that the child had access to a device either at home or at school. And in response to some of the challenges and chaos of remote instruction last year, a lot of schools are beginning to invest in training and professional development to help teachers get up to speed on some of the new digital tools that they are asked to use these days. And as a result, many say they feel much better equipped to teach with technology than before. We're also seeing some similar trends of digital adoption in higher education. In the US, one of the biggest drivers of changes in higher ed is the demographic shift in terms of who attends college. Now, we often think of college students as 18 to 21-year-olds, especially like ones that you see in the movies. But the reality is that they are increasingly what we call non-traditional students. They are often working adults who have kids, who are juggling their studies along with other responsibilities like earning money or caring for a children or a parent. These are students who need flexibility in where and how and when they learn. And in response, we have been seeing colleges and students turn to third-party online courses. Coursera is one of the biggest US-based providers. In the UK, there is FutureLearn. All of them are seeing a boost over the pandemic in terms of enrollment and the learners served. Universities are also increasingly working with companies to create fully online degree programs and also shorter bootcamp-like courses for students who are looking for a quicker upskilling experience. Now, still, one of the biggest challenges for higher education these days is whether they are adequately preparing students for meaningful work and careers. And one of the biggest critiques and evidence has been that there is a mismatch between education and employment and career opportunities. As of this past June, almost half of recent U.S. college graduates were underemployed or unemployed. One of the things that we hear often from employers is that they want to see education programs that better integrate work and learning, something more of a return to their apprenticeship-like models. And we believe that technology, there's tremendous opportunity to bridge that gap, to connect employers and students around world projects and provide academic credit for experiential learning, especially in a world where work is being done remotely. Now, these are just a few of the current trends and tailwinds that are accelerating seismic changes in education today. One of the most telling and one of my favorite graphs is this one, which shows how over the past 2 decades, as the cost of computing software has decreased, the cost of education in college textbooks has actually skyrocketed. Right? These are two these are two lines that are going opposite directions. And as former educators and now investors, we believe that more digital innovation and training can help temper these skyrocketing costs. Globally, it's estimated that about 6.4 trillion is spent every year in education, and the vast majority of that is on non-digital costs and services. We don't expect 100% to shift to digital, but we do think there is still a massive opportunity in the education market to grow as an industry in ways that are more affordable and sustainable for learners. So our thesis is that by embracing and investing in tech innovations, we can really help expand education opportunities and elevate economic mobility for all learners. So that's just a very quick high-level summary of this report. You can find a full report on our blog at medium.com/reachcapital. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. And it's a pleasure to be here, and I look forward to connecting and taking some of your questions.
That was fantastic, Tony. There was so much to take away on that. Indeed, this was the biggest experiment during the pandemic. So yes, that was well said. I found it very interesting about the study web that you also have too. I thought that was very interesting. Some of the quotes that you have about some of the students saying never felt so connected and productive based on these platforms that they're using. So, and also I think another takeaway is the infrastructure that is needed to bridge the gap, and also the effectiveness of how teachers are increasing their skills as they get more in line. So fantastic. Thank you for sharing, Tony. We have 2 questions that have come up. We have one from Ben Davis. Does Reach Capital have any interest in the development of educational tools for students with intellectual, cognitive, or neurodiversity, autism, learning issues?
Yes, we do. We believe in technologies that can really encompass and accommodate the needs of all learners. And so the most important thing is to take into account the context and the situations that different families are in. So, yes, in our portfolio, we do focus on tools that serve as particular segments of the population, whether it's English language learners, whether it's learners with special needs. We span the whole gamut.
Great. And the other question we have is, do you predict lower or higher fees in university degrees globally after a possible shift to fully online learning?
We believe that digital innovation and some of these partnerships that I shared will lower the cost of higher education. And it's not just our belief. I think that if you look at the global higher education enrollment trends, in the U.S. it has been declining, and cost has been one of the biggest factors in that the ROI is just not really there. And so even from a higher ed institution's perspective, like for their sake, I think for their survival and for their continued existence, they have to find ways to lower costs, to make it more affordable, to make it more accessible. There are a lot of, the good thing about digital innovations in this space and some of these online programs is that they're able to scale effective content and materials a lot more effectively, right? So that some of the costs that you might associate with things like textbooks, right, or other materials or other equipment, we can lower that if there is a way to distribute some of the best quality materials efficiently.